Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. Time for the September Q&A. We won't do 6 episodes though, because we did miss the whole of last month. Unfortunately, I was sick. You guys probably know about that now, but Q&As are back. So I'm pretty excited. Haven't caught up with Tim for a few months now. And yeah, we'll get into it. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by ZimaBoard, the world's first hackable single board server for creators, starting at just $120 US. It's created by people who grew tired of reoccurring fees, unfriendly presets, and isolated systems, so they set out to make the home digital experience more attractive and more affordable. ZimaBoard has the expandability of an x86 SBC with the power of a microserver. It allows you to set up a 4TB personal cloud in 5 minutes, configure a secure VPN to protect your digital footprint, tune your network with OpenWRT and pfSense, build a 4K media server that runs with Plex, share and collaborate with team members on your files, or upgrade your smart projects across different systems. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. All right, Tim, do you think Nvidia's DLSS version naming, sub-features, and support is getting out of hand? So you did touch on this, didn't you? Because I watched your video.
Yeah, I touched on this in the DLSS 3.5 video. Yeah, it's getting pretty confusing, I think, for owners of GeForce GPUs, especially if they continue to add features to the sort of DLSS family. I think it made a lot more sense back in the day when DLSS just referred to the super resolution feature, because it is deep learning super sampling, and it feels like something like, I guess ray reconstruction sort of does super sampling, and frame generation sort of does it as well, but it was much easier back in the DLSS 2.0 days when it just referred to the one thing. Nowadays, you got to look and see what specific features are being referenced, what GPU do you have, and whether it supports all of the 3.5 features or only some of the 3.5 features. And I can imagine with future generations, we'll have like a DLSS 4 situation where potentially some of those features you can run back on your 20 series card, and some of them are maybe only exclusive to like a 50 series. So yeah, it's getting pretty confusing. I think that they probably need to optimize the naming a bit. I don't really know how they would have, but I would like to see DLSS continue to just mean super resolution, and they could use some other name for frame generation and ray reconstruction. But even then, it's kind of clunky name, like ray reconstruction. How many times did I say that in my video? Probably like 100 times. It's this long word. Anyway, yeah, getting a bit annoying.
It's almost like it needs to be RTX ray reconstruction and then like RTX frame generation or something like that, rather than it be DLSS, because, well, at least with like frame generation, for example, you don't need DLSS to be enabled to use that feature.
Yeah, that's right.
Independently.
And like Nvidia is saying things like, you know, they want to be comparing DLSS off, so that means super resolution, frame generation, and ray reconstruction all off, versus DLSS 3.5 on, which then has all of those features on, so you can sort of get the DLSS benefit. But, you know, each of the technologies has different pros and cons, and there are some situations where you may want to use one of the technologies, but not the other technology. Like Fortnite, for example, you might only want to use super resolution, even though I believe it is getting frame generation in an update, or has it already got it yet?
I don't know if it's got it yet, but I can't imagine you'll want to use frame generation in any kind of like competitive shooter type game. Don't think that'll work very well, but I'm interested to look at it when it is added. But yeah, I think it's getting confusing, and it's getting, and if things keep trending the way they have been generations down the track, they're going to have to do some kind of restructuring, because it's going to be a complete mess.
Yeah, and it helps, I guess, obfuscate some of the performance data that NVIDIA provides. Like, you often see their charts, which has like DLSS off and then DLSS on being this big difference in the length of the bars and the numbers, but it doesn't really split it up into, you know, what is the DLSS super resolution component of the performance uplift versus the frame generation component.
Yeah, it makes frame generation look maybe much more powerful than it actually is, for example.
Yeah, like for example, like if they had split it up to show you those two technologies separately, like they used 3 colors on the bars instead of 2, then you could sort of see, oh, maybe the performance was adequate just with super resolution, so frame generation isn't as necessary in that game. So yeah, the more that they add to that package, the more they'll be able to lengthen those sorts of bars and make it, you know, even more, I guess, confusing for buyers. But you know, I guess that's the path that they've wanted to take. We'll see where it leads.
All right, Tim. Will the long last introduction of FSR3 make purchasing an AMD graphics card a more compelling and attractive choice for gamers looking to elevate their gaming experience?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, next question.
No. I mean, the simple reality is that FSR3 will work across all GPUs, theoretically. We're still yet to see what that means. Whether that's a good experience across all GPUs is yet to be seen. But the theory is that it would work. I can't believe we're still talking about theory. This should have been out months ago. But anyway, the theory is it should work across all GPUs. So an Nvidia owner, if they were tossing up, let's buy a GeForce GPU, you'd get access to DLSS 3 and FSR3. A Radeon owner only gets access to FSR3. So it's not really a selling point, is it? Like, the GeForce owner still gets the better feature set. So it's not like you're tossing up between, do I go the proprietary GeForce feature or the proprietary AMD feature? So, yeah, I guess AMD's position on this has always been they're trying to kill off DLSS.
Yeah, they're trying to nullify that feature advantage, but yeah.
I don't think they've really been successful in doing that, and certainly
they've helped minimize, I suppose, the damage that not having.
Yeah,
but yeah,
like the goal is they get FSR in the games that you're playing. So instead of tossing up between DLSS 3 frame generation and nothing, the gap is now reduced to maybe the gap will be 10-20%. Again, we're sort of guessing here because we haven't tested the feature. Still, AMD haven't tested the feature. It's nearly a year. What are you doing?
It's on the box, though. I was just looking up there. I'm like, there's a box up there that says
FSR. Oh, yeah. It's so silly. Anyway, yes. So yeah, you're not really going to be buying an AMD graphics card to get that feature, but it's going to be impacting the level to which it makes an impact. So yeah, I think it's sort of an interesting. I've sort of said that I think AMD needs to start going down the making the experience as good as possible for their buyers. So then you are sort of tossing up. If I get a Radeon GPU, then I've got all these cool features that I can use and that enhances the game experience, as opposed to just trying to nullify the opposition, because that sort of hasn't worked, at least in my opinion. So yeah, I don't expect FSR3 will be shaking this up too much. Depending on how many games they get in, maybe it'll reduce the gap between the two brands. But yeah, I don't really see it convincing GeForce owners to go across to the red team anytime soon.
All right, Tim, given the recent comment from Nvidia's own VP of Deep Learning Research, do you think that the importance of native resolution in gaming is a thing of the past, okay, given the advancements in DLSS and FSR, or is this just more PR nonsense? No way, never. Will 4K and 8K gaming be a goal anymore? So I'm interested to hear what your response to that one is.
Yeah, there's probably a fair bit to say here, isn't there? I mean, I guess where I'd start from is sort of like the native resolution of the card, it still heavily relates to the experience. Like, yeah, okay, all these games can run DLSS, but if your card it only starts running at 720p, then your DLSS experience is not going to be as good as a card that can render at 1080p before applying DLSS, because as we know, ultra performance versus performance of 4K, which is the difference between 720p and 1080p rendering, is quite substantially different. The same thing is at 1080p, the lower down you have to go in terms of your render resolution, it does genuinely affect the quality. Now, maybe NVIDIA's point is, at some point in the future, we could just render at a super low resolution. It looks the same as running at a native resolution, but they're yet to prove that. So certainly the native performance of a card still matters and still will matter for some time, because otherwise everyone would just be buying 4060s, because who cares that a 4090 can render the game at 1440p versus 720p. So
they sort of shot themselves in their foot with that one.
Yeah, so it determines the whole level of performance. It determines how good all those features are, how many quality settings you can turn on, the level of the upscaling. You know, the higher tier graphics cards have more tensor cores because the tensor cores scale with the shader units of the card as well. So the capabilities are all changing based on the level of standard traditional native resolution rendering that you're getting. So again, like,
it's a pretty silly, absurd claim to make.
It makes a huge difference for frame generation as well, because if the native resolution experience, it's not even a native resolution experience, the native frame rate experience, let's say, is 30 FPS on one card and 60 FPS on another card, then the latency you get after frame generation is going to be far superior on the card that can run natively at 60 FPS. So you're sort of getting these experiences that, okay, yeah, AI it's doing things, right? Like it's potentially enhancing the experience and giving you additional things, but the base level is still largely dictating the final quality of that. And I certainly would much rather play on a GPU that has started frame generation at 60 FPS versus 30 FPS. The motion there is going to be significantly better. And again, like until Nvidia can prove that those challenges can be overcome in certain ways, like as I said, if they can prove that super resolution at 720p looks just as good as super resolution rendering at 1800p or 1440p, or that frame generation running at 30 FPS is just as good as running at 60 FPS, the native experience is still very relevant to those cards.
Yeah, and if they achieve that, it's like, then
that's good, right?
It's like they just need to make one GPU then.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't make any sense.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess where they're sort of coming from is like the fact that, I guess I would agree with this to some extent, that the actual end of the day experience that a gamer is probably playing at these days is not native resolution gaming. Mm-hmm. We would certainly recommend for most people that you'd be using some sort of upscaling, whether that's quality settings or resolution sliding it to the level that you're acceptable with. I think that
depends on the resolution, of course.
Yeah, of course. Like at 4K, you could realistically be using DLSS balanced or DLSS quality, whereas at 1080p would be shying away from DLSS to some degree. So it does depend on the resolution, but I think largely speaking, we'd be saying to gamers, you can get a very similar experience to native resolution gaming by using DLSS or FSR at the highest quality level. Like you can get it's a pretty easy 20-30% performance improvement with little impact to visuals. And I think for most people, that's worth it. Again, a feature like ray reconstruction has just come in. I think for most gamers, yeah, it has issues, but it provides improved visual quality largely at a very low to no performance cost. So yeah, the actual experience that gamers are getting is an AI enhanced. It is a non-native resolution experience. But I guess what they're trying to say here is that like you shouldn't be testing at native resolution because the AI experience is what people are actually playing at. Whereas I would disagree with that by saying that the native resolution still informs the quality of all of those techniques. And it's very much why we still believe that native resolution testing is the way to go. It's the most apples to apples. And again, like it scales the best. Like you can apply, let's say a card doing 70 FPS versus 80 FPS native rendering will tend to then provide that percentage difference after DLSS as well. Like the 80 FPS card also runs the DLSS image at a higher frame rate, which gives you a better experience. So
yeah, basically, you're drinking the Kool-Aid if you test that way. Like Nvidia is wanting us to reproduce the marketing slides they show you guys, where it's like reflexes on, and this is, but then for native, all of that's off.
Yeah,
and it's like, but you can turn that on at native and get those improvements as well.
Yeah, so, like each setting that they're turning on has different impacts that need to be assessed on their merits.
Yeah,
and to the level that they provide benefits. Which, how many times have we talked about the DLSS is better at 4K than it is at 1080p?
Yeah.
Like going and saying that the future of gaming is AI rendering is probably true, but then right now it heavily depends on the level of resolution.
Yeah, it's like when everyone's saying, well, not everyone, sorry. It's like when some people were saying ray tracing is the future of gaming. Why are you guys not on board? You don't understand. When we were reviewing Turing GPUs like the RTX 2060, and we were like, yeah, look, this supports ray tracing, but it's pretty unimpressive. There's not that many titles. A lot of them look like garbage. The performance hits too much. We don't think buying an RTX 2060 with the hopes of enjoying a ray traced future is smart. You buy that GPU because it makes sense based on rasterization performance and what you're getting now in games. And if there's something that's a similar price from, a Radeon GPU that's offering more performance, maybe that's a better buy long term. We certainly saw that with like parts like the 5700 XT aged much better, and it didn't even support ray tracing. But you're not playing a lot of the newer games on a 2060 or 2060 Super using ray tracing.
Yeah.
So exactly what we said back then turned out to be true.
I'm sure in the future, I mean, we're pretty much already there now, as I said, like gamers, the actual final experience will be some sort of upscaled, some sort of running all these neural techniques, and they're trying to improve the rendering techniques through temporal sampling and changing the denoising and just generating frames out of nowhere, that sort of thing. Like, that is, you can quite clearly see that's where things are going. But then again, like, how much, basically it all comes back down to the actual final performance of the card. And I imagine in the future, we will still be seeing these sorts of, the different levels of AI processing is going to depend on the level of quality that you're going to get out of the game. And, the amount of samples that they're able to take into the AI network is going to determine the final output quality, which is going to, again, come down to eventually the performance of the cards themselves. So, evaluating each of these settings on its individual merits and applying that on top of native rendering is the better solution at the moment.
And it's arguably more misleading at Nvidia's disadvantage, given the fact that we've proven, and we generally see it time and time again, that FSR and DLSS scaling with the similar quality levels results in roughly the same performance scaling.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, like, if anything, that serves to be a bit misleading. Like, if the GeForce GPU looks better with DLSS quality at 1080p, then the Radeon GPU looks with FSR 2 point whatever at quality at 1080p, then you've got into this sort of subjective, not apples to apples kind of which one looks better. And, and there could be an instance, which is the concern we had originally, was that because DLSS generally does look better, particularly at 1080p, we didn't want to run into instances where FSR resulted in more performance uplift than DLSS did, but also looked worse.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting this apples to orange comparison in terms of visuals that favors the Radeon GPU. So it just gets messy, and that's why native is king in our opinion, at least at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for testing, it makes the most sense. And I think on top of that, it's like, if a lot of the advertising for a product is around these AI enhanced and upscaling techniques, and they're being marketed to you based on the experience at 4K, there's always that question of, well, what happens on lower tier performance cards at different render resolutions? And that's something that we've been really key on exploring, is looking at something like DLSS and FSR, not just at the 4K ideal scenario that runs at the best, but also looking at it on your mid-tier and lower tier cards, because ultimately most of the marketing is surrounding, okay, let's run Cyberpunk using ray tracing overdrive settings. We've turned on DLSS performance mode at 4K and we're cranking up everything. But then how well is that scaling to a 4060 type product? And the answer is,
spoiler,
not very well. So this is where these sorts of upscaling discussions come into play, and why apples to oranges testing via, let's compare the AMD techniques to the Nvidia techniques, becomes so difficult. Because if we're sort of sitting here saying, well, at 4K we've tested these features and Nvidia has the superior image quality and upscaling solutions and AI technologies, therefore you must always buy a GeForce GPU, but that's more true when testing it at 4K than it is at 1080p, then we're potentially misleading buyers, because then we go and test it at 1080p and we find something totally different. And at the moment, what we're finding is, DLSS and FSR are much more similar when testing on high-end cards that can do 4K than they are when we're looking at 1440p or 1080p class GPUs. And it becomes that discussion where potentially you'd value it in a different way on those sort of different performance tier cards. And again, it's like Nvidia wants people to be testing using these subjective test methodologies, because the thinking would be that, when we get into subjective testing, it becomes based on opinions, and opinions can be influenced by all sorts of different factors. Again, that sounds like I've just said that there's something corrupt going on, but what I mean more is like someone could favor ray tracing quality, whereas someone else could be favoring, say, latency in a multiplayer game. And it comes down just purely on who's doing the review as to the conclusion that you get. Whereas apples to apples data that's being tested using a scientific proven method that's comparing the same thing is going to be producing a much more robust opinion, at least in our opinion. So again, like, we have a lot of these discussions internally because it's getting so complicated to do reviews and to do testing, and the approaches that you take, we're sort of bouncing it up between we need to be doing apples to apples testing because that's the most robust way. And the only way to do that these days is native resolution, which is why native resolution is still king. But then we're sort of understanding that typically speaking, a gamer will be using a feature like DLSS or FSR while actually playing the game. And then again, frame generation, you may not be using in some games, you may be using in other games. So it's so messy. It's so messy. And yeah, we're just constantly, I guess, evaluating these testing methodologies and trying to keep on top of it all. And hopefully the way that we're approaching things is sort of the optimal way for now. But certainly we believe that native resolution is important for testing today.
All right. According to the latest rumors, the things you love to tackle and talk about,
Okay.
RDNA 4 won't have high-end cards to offer, like Polaris and RDNA 1. Do you think it's possible for AMD to build an empire on budget mid-range cards only before contesting Nvidia at the high end? So that is an interesting one. I don't think so is the answer. Like, you know, it's more, I think when you've got a really good value mid-range offering, that is really appealing and exciting for us reviewers and PC enthusiasts. But for sort of the mainstream market, it doesn't do you any favors. It doesn't get your name out there and people excited about your products. Like, most people aren't buying an RTX 4090, but being a Halo product and the fastest, it's really important. And obviously that's why Nvidia always has pushed to have the fastest GPU, because that generates sales further down the food chain. So not having that, it makes it, I don't know what the word is. Like, does it make it harder for gamers almost to take Radeon as a brand more seriously if they're not competing at the high end?
I think so. Yeah, I think, as you say, like, even back in the RDNA 1 era, when we had a 5700 XT that was a good quality GPU that was worth buying, you know, it's still hard to convince people to buy that product. I mean, it's hard for AMD to convince people. The competing RTX 2070 still sold very well in that sort of price category because of things like the halo effect. And on top of that, like, if AMD came out with, let's say they had come out with a feature like path tracing, they can't use mid-range GPUs to sort of sell that sort of feature that may actually require a high-end GPU. So Nvidia has the benefit of going, well, not only do we have the fastest GPU, but we're innovating with these really hard-to-run technologies that are going to enhance and bring the next generation of gaming. So they do that by showing you that feature on a 4090 and then trying to convince you that a 4060 is a card that is going to deliver you that future, which isn't really the case, but there is that sort of marketing advantage there. So if AMD comes out with a next generation future of gaming type feature and it requires a super powerful GPU that they're not even making, it becomes much more hard for them to sort of sell you on those sorts of things, which limits the options that they have for sort of integrating cutting edge technologies into games. So they lose out on that benefit, which is, you know, clearly things are heading that way where companies are trying to sell you on these high tier features that you need expensive GPUs to run. So if the only thing that they've got going for them is value and sort of the basics of performance, it's questionable whether that's going to be enough to sell those products. It really relies on word of mouth and looking at reviews in depth and that sort of thing, which again, someone just going to a store buying a pre-built is not necessarily going to be thinking, oh yeah, the 88 or 8700 XT is better cost per frame than the Nvidia 5070 or whatever. They're going to be thinking, yeah, I saw that, you know, the RTX series of GPUs can do this thing called path tracing, or I hear that's like a next generation thing, and you know they've got this 5070 option. I'll just get that, and yeah, so you lose out on that. So yeah, I'm not convinced it's the right move for them, but obviously, you know, if the rumors are true, then they've got some reasons for it. So we'll see.
At this point, is it worth buying an RTX 4080 for the 16 gigabytes of VRAM or wait until next gen? And what price should the 4070 Ti/4080 be at this time? Well, I mean, what price should a 4080 be? So the 3080, which we thought was great value, was $700.
So
$700. I mean, ideally, yes, but let's take inflation and other.
I've taken those into consideration, and it should be $700.
Well, you've twisted my arm, and I tend to agree. Maybe like $800, not $900 at most.
I mean, I personally couldn't be recommending it any more than $1,000 in the current market. And we're talking about like a crappy market, right? Like,
yeah, I'm not talking. Yeah, I wasn't taking a crappy market. I was talking about what. Yeah.
So it should be priced even better than that. So I guess like $1,000 is sort of the ceiling, and then it's probably more realistically like, as you say, $800 or $900. But then on top of that, like the only reason we're talking about that in this question is that that's Nvidia's own, like that's the minimum that you get for 16 gigabytes outside of the 4060 Ti 16 gig, and really. A product like a 4070 should have 16 gig, and that should be more like $500, $400-ish dollars. So,
basically, what price should it be? We're clearly thinking more like previous pricing structures of generations just gone. Maybe a small premium for economic factors, but we haven't seen motherboards. I know people will go, "Oh, motherboards are so expensive now," but there are reasonably well-featured motherboards that aren't too extreme for both AMD and Intel. Memories across the board is affordable, whether it's DDR5 or NAND flash. It's all of those things are pretty affordable now. They don't seem to be under the same economic pressure as GPUs. I wonder why that is. It has nothing to do with that AI I've heard of. So while people like to talk about inflation, all these things which are real, the degree to which they're real is highly debatable. So some premium associated with them, sure. Not $1,200 US for a 4080. That's absurd.
I don't think it's worth buying a 4080 just to get 16 gigabytes of VRAM. There are certainly many other products that, if that was your main consideration, that would be much more worth buying.
Yeah, you can look at cost per frame stuff to work out what's offering you the best value for around the price you're willing to spend. But yeah, would you buy one now in the product cycle, or would you just hold out and see what happens next year? Depends on what you've got, I suppose, your situation, how... Yeah. You could be holding out quite comfortably, or you could be holding out in absolute desperation.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't be waiting on the expectation that prices are going to be dropping slowly over time. It seems, having now done these GPU pricing updates monthly, it seems more like we're going to get into a period of stability with pricing, where things will settle at a level, and that will be it. And you might get the occasional sales for things like Black Friday and so forth. But it seems like the only things that are really driving different GPU prices at the moment are the launch of new products. So, for example, Nvidia dropping a 4070 from $500 to $450 was only because AMD produced the 7800 XT. So, yeah, once we sort of get those products in, you're probably pretty much just waiting for a next generation of cards. I wouldn't be like hoping fingers crossed that suddenly a 4080 is going to be $700 like midway through next year. I think they're very much just going to hold out, not produce the cards, just like don't bother making those. We'll just make some AI focused stuff and workstation cards and whatever. And that's going to be the situation. And I think what we've talked about in previous Q&As about trying to reset the market, reset expectations on GPU pricing is probably going to be what will be the situation moving forward. There's probably still a few adjustments that need to be made, like a 7700 XT is just not going to sell at $450, so that's potentially going to come down. But beyond that, it is what it is, really.
All right, Tim, I think this is something we've talked about a bit, but I'll read it out. We'll get into it.
Sure.
A question about RTX 4070 and RX 7800 XT. How much more do you think is wise to spend on the Nvidia card, which boasts a richer feature set? So, frame generation support, better super sampling technique, DLSS, and then the upcoming ray reconstruction, which promises to widen even more of the gap on ray tracing performance and visuals between the two teams. So we've talked about this quite a bit. So the 7800 XT is meant to be, it was reviewed to be 17% cheaper. So it was $100 cheaper, from $600 down to $500. I've got that right, haven't I?
That's right. So it's 20% more expensive going the other way.
That's right, or a 17% reduction. Thereabouts. It's about 20%, sure. And now it's dropped down to, I want to say 9%, something like that.
Around 10%.
So I can't give a firm figure, but I would say, off the top of my head, I would say 10% is the minimum. Like 10%'s like
at the same performance level, obviously.
At roughly the same performance level
for rasterization performance. To be clear with this,
rasterization performance. So Yeah, at minimum, they'd have to be at least 10% cheaper. I think ideally more like 15%. And then when you get to the closer to 20%, which was, we were somewhere in that range, then it becomes, in my opinion, the Radeon GPU becomes the obvious buy at almost 20% cheaper.
Yeah, and it was a little faster as well, right? For
I had more VRAM.
So.
There was other factors at play for sure.
So I think it's a hard question to answer because the quality and usefulness of the features does depend on the price tier. So I think up near like 4090 level territory, the premium could be more than it would be in the 4070 tier, and then more again than it would be in the sort of 4060 tier.
That's right.
Because a feature like ray reconstruction and faster ray tracing performance is very relevant for a 4090 because you're much more likely to be running ray tracing, whereas for a 4060, it's questionable whether the overall performance of that tier of card is good enough for ray tracing. Well, similar with DLSS, right? Like DLSS is better at 4K than it is at 1080p, so that determines the value of DLSS to be higher, in my opinion, at sort of a 4090 tier. So, yeah, I think it could vary anywhere from potentially as low as 10% for the minimum in the sort of 4060 tier, but up for a premium product, 20% could easily be justified as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And again, like it could be even more could be needed simply because high-end buyers tend to have more disposable money. They're sort of diminishing return sort of plays into it. People are willing to pay more for premium features. So
that's what we said in our 7900 XTX and 7900 XT reviews. And a lot of people got really upset that we were suggesting that, well, you'd spend the extra money on the 4090, and then from the 7900 XT, you'd spend the extra money on the 4080 for the reasons you've just spoke of. People got upset about that because it is quite a large amount of money. But it's like, well, when you're spending $1,000, what's $200, or $600? It's like you're already going into what I would consider pretty absurd, pretty luxurious territory. But
yeah, that's right. Like, I guess it's unfair in some respects to stereotype and generalize buyers in this way. But generally speaking, if you're buying sort of that $200 or $300 product, you don't have as much income available, and you're not allocating as much money to your GPU, so you're not prioritizing as much. So, even a 10, 20% difference or a $50 difference or whatever the dollar amount you want to factor in there, it's more significant than someone who has decided that this is a luxury good and they have a large amount to spend. They're going to be able to justify generally larger percentage differences in price, larger dollar amounts, simply because they've got that extra sort of premium amount to spend. So again, that factors into this as well. So it's hard to just sit here and say the number is 15%. Because it can vary depending on a number of different factors. But I think if we were to give a number, generally AMD should be starting at least 10%, but probably around 15% at a minimum for these sorts of products. So again, I think Radeon hasn't necessarily been delivering that all of the time, but that tier of cards, 7800 XT versus 4070, was probably the closest we've got to that sort of ideal pricing structure. And
it seems like Nvidia agrees because they knocked $50 off.
Exactly.
So they went for that margin. They realized that where they were at, the $100 US was too much. That was going to start to impact their sales. So they got ahead of that. And as soon as the 7800 XT was released, very soon after, they knocked $50 off the 4070. And they acted on the 4060 Ti 16GB pretty much instantly.
Yeah,
because that was probably already not selling well. It was pretty evident that card was dead in the water.
Yeah,
and $50 off, that made quite a significant deal with that product. I'm not saying it made it a great value buy or anything, but
it changes it a fair bit.
It helps a lot.
Yeah.
So, do we answer the question?
I think so.
Good. Let's move on. What do you think of the new iPhone 15 Pro being able to run console games?
Is that really what they say? I guess that's maybe what Apple's advertised.
I read that right. That's what the...
Okay. Interesting. I mean...
What console games is it running? Like, is Commander keen on console?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if they're talking about running PS4 era games at 720p 30 FPS with the quality settings dialed down, and you think that's a really good experience, then yeah, I guess it's a console gaming experience now.
Nice.
So if you're talking about games released in sort of a decade ago, then yeah, that could be a really good experience. For everyone else that likes good quality gaming experiences, I mean, the facts are that a 10-watt phone is not running games at a console level. And the thing that annoys me about this marketing and things like, oh my God, a phone, it can run console games. Wow, that's incredible. These consoles, they run at 400, no, they don't actually run at 400 watts. They run at like 200 watts or something. And you're telling me a phone can do that at 10 watts? Why even bother? But the marketing caveat is always that they're running like old games, and like people always like, oh my God, the phone can run this, it's like a PS4 quality. It's like a PS4 was released 10 years ago. Your performance of these consoles has improved significantly since then, and hardware in general has gotten significantly more efficient just in general across the board. So, the comparisons of like this versus console from years ago, I don't think.
Yeah, I think there's an argument to made in a way that's impressive, but also very misleading.
Yeah, it's like you should be impressed that this phone runs games to a higher level than the previous phone, and that it's constrained to 10 watts and it can run certain levels of experiences better, which you would just expect naturally as performance and efficiency improves across a variety of products, right? Like phones get better, therefore the games that they can run will get more visually impressive over time. But yeah, these sorts of comparisons all the time of like this versus like, oh, I'm going to be throwing out my console now because I can just plug my phone into a display and run games is like, it's not really factoring in the sort of general experience of why people are buying gaming consoles. Like I think the games that they're advertising with things like, what was it, like Death Stranding, I think is coming to the iPhone or something. It's like, okay, that phone was designed to run on a PS4. It was released many years ago. We're not talking about a premium console experience that people like. We're not talking about Horizon Forbidden West. We're not talking about Cyberpunk 2077. We're not talking about the new Spider-Man game running on a phone.
So your answer to the question is just haha. Is that right?
Pretty much. I mean, It's not going to run today's console games by my definition of what a console game is.
That's fine. So could we stop to about iPhones?
Yes.
All right, let's move on. All right, this one is a bit personalized, but we'll go with it. I've been waiting for ages to upgrade my GTX 1063GB. Yeah. But all of the latest releases for the past few years have offered minimal improvements unless I spend lots of money that I don't have. Yeah, don't recommend doing that. What are my best options now? Yeah, okay, I see where you're coming from because you can certainly get much better, much more powerful GPUs than a GTX 1063GB, but replacing that product for roughly the same money you originally spent is near on impossible because the MSRP for that product was $200. It was like $240, I think, for the 6GB model. So
I think so.
$200. $270 is the cheapest current gen, isn't it? The 7600.
7600. Obviously, you can buy newer products that are cheaper, as in like that are currently still being sold. Like you're not buying a used product that are a bit cheaper than that. I mean, I guess in some ways, like there has been inflation since the release of the 1063
That's
gigabyte.
fair. Yep.
So a card that's $200 then would probably cost. Now, again, I don't have the inflation numbers off the top of my head, so economists and people that follow this, please don't really destroy me with this.
They're upset.
I would imagine that is more like a $250 GPU now. I think that's probably...
More expensive is the point.
More expensive.
So an RX 7600, that must be a lot faster than a GTX 1063GB. Like a lot faster.
Well, a 1063GB is not going to play many games simply because of its 3GB VRAM buffer.
Yeah.
Like that's going to be highly restrictive. So based on that fact, I would imagine that you can pretty much get anything on the market today and be faster.
Even VRAM aside, just
pure performance.
It's got to be I'm
interested over twice as fast.
Yeah, I'm interested to look at that. But yeah, surely getting yourself something like a 7600 would be a mega upgrade for you. And there's, of course, there's RDNA 2 options. Mm-hmm. I'm not just focusing on AMD because we love AMD. It's just because there's not that many GeForce options at sub $300 prices. The RTX 4060s, well, I guess I guess it's equally as garbage as the RX 7600. So, I'm not really advocating for either of those products.
No, we can't recommend a 3050. So
can't recommend a 3050. So yeah, you'd be better off looking at what RDNA 2 products like I don't know, 6600 XT or something like that, 6650 XT. I don't know what prices those are. Yeah.
I mean, like, I would think that the used market is quite good in that sort of sub $200 market at the moment, because a lot of people don't want to be selling, like, the quality, the cost per frame you can get around $200 used is very good. Once you start getting down to like $180, you start, like, people are selling cards that are very slow for way too much. Once you start getting into like used 1650s and things like that, it can often be $10 or $20 more to upgrade to like a 1660 Super, 1660 Ti, rather than getting those cards. But certainly, if you were interested in used, now I'm assuming you bought your 1063 gigabyte new, so it's kind of like, should we be recommending going from buying new to now buying used? Again, I can sort of understand why you wouldn't want to do that, but certainly you can get like an RX 5700 XT for around, I think it's like $140 used these days. The 1660, again, those are around like $100.
I guess the point
and those will be
is,
faster.
while we don't necessarily like the RTX 4060 or RX 7600, we don't think they're particularly great value at all. But even so, for the $70 to $100 US premium you would have paid all those years ago for your GPU, they're offering a substantial upgrade, I would imagine. So probably worth looking at.
Yep.
All right, Tim. Now, be very careful how you answer this one, okay? Just saying. What would you say, and again, be very careful how you answer this, all right? I can't stress that enough, okay? All right. What would you say is the most frustrating part of your work, if anything? Is it dealing with companies who you're trying out products from? Is it the time-consuming testing, or is it something else? So, Tim, give us your answer here. It doesn't have to be an honest one.
Okay. I guess you don't want me to offend people.
Or persons.
Genuinely, the thing I find the most frustrating is when there's a problem with testing or something and it takes me a long time to solve it. I think that's probably, like, the other day I was having some issues doing the Cyberpunk optimization guide, which has probably come out by the time that you're seeing this, where the game would just crash a lot. And I couldn't figure out what was causing the game to crash, and it was taking many hours of my time dealing with all these crashes and annoyances. So when things like that happen, I find that very frustrating. Like, why is this game crashing so often? I'm changing things around. Why is this not fixing it? And even things like, I think back when I was testing monitors and we found that there was a difference in performance for HDR for some monitors between AMD and Nvidia GPUs, which was very surprising to discover because most of the time they just produce a signal. It should be the same between both vendors. So you kind of find these discrepancies and you're like, what on earth is going on here? That's so bizarre. This shouldn't be happening. And then you try and investigate it and you don't find conclusions and it's taking a long time. You get very frustrated because you're like, am I testing this wrong? Like, am I just an idiot that doesn't know what I'm doing and I'm just doing something wrong and I'm going to embarrass myself by producing all this bad data for a video? Or is it actually an issue and a discovery? So I find that pretty frustrating, and yeah, it can sort of maybe be a bit of swearing in my office when I'm sort of getting into that sort of stuff. But yeah.
I when I read that out, I was struggling to think of anything, but that is a good one. Yeah. I haven't, for the most part, things are pretty good, but frustrating would be like if the camera gear or the audio gear fails. So
that is frustrating. That happened to us with the Q&A a couple of sessions ago.
Yeah, 2 or 3 months ago, we filmed a 2-hour Q&A, and I don't even remember what the problem was now.
I think we were using a power pack and the power motor just slightly shut down for a brief moment or something.
There was something wrong with the DC power pack. And because of the type of camera we were using and the format it was recording in, it would corrupt the whole file. So we got about an hour and 10 minutes in and the DC power pack overheated or something and shut off for a second and corrupted everything. And then sort of.
That's frustrating. Sometimes I filmed a video and it's like slightly out of focus, but I filmed the whole video, so I have to go back and do it again.
Yep.
But like, I think if it comes to like dealing with companies or commenters and things like that, I don't really find that stuff frustrating. Like, occasionally you get companies that maybe you need to send a few more emails than is ideal to get points across, but it's not that frustrating. Like, it's rare that sort of stuff happens, whereas testing issues and things and happens a bit more often.
Like aggressive or negative comments, generally we find that amusing. Tim and I have a bit of a laugh about that. Sometimes we share it with you guys on Twitter or something. Or
our Discord community will bring it to our attention. We have a good laugh in there about it.
That's where we see most of it. Yeah, the Discord guys love that sort of stuff. So that's more amusing than anything. Certainly doesn't, it's water off a duck's back. It doesn't upset us or frustrate us. I think...
I find some aspects of the work more tiring than others. Like I think I've mentioned before that I'm not a huge fan of video editing. I find that the least exciting and interesting part of the job. So part of the reason why I didn't want to do like optimization guides, and why I stopped doing them a few years ago, is that I found the editing process extremely tedious, which isn't frustrating. It's just like that's a part of the job I didn't super enjoy. And
you're a privileged YouTuber, mate.
Luckily with the Starfield guide, I spent quite a lot of time finding some new workflows that made it easier to edit those videos together, which has been pretty successful. So I was happy with the process for that.
That was a good video.
Things like that. I mean, not every part of the job is amazing, but I can't sit here and say I have a bad job or anything. I have a fantastic job. I love doing it, and I'm very lucky to be doing it. So, most parts are not frustrating or tedious. So, overall good, I think.
All right, Tim. I don't think we were too rusty, despite taking a month off.
No. Well, we have started the podcast, obviously, so that's kept us with our skills nice and honed and ready to go for Q&As. So
check out the podcast if you haven't.
Yep, it's a lot of fun.
Yep, we'll probably put a link for that or something, and maybe in the...
We'll put a link if we remember. I usually forget, but we'll put a link in to the podcast, which it's very similar to these sort of Q&A sessions. Obviously, more just like news topics and things like that, but same sort of just we discuss things, the latest things that are going on.
Have a bit of a chat, really.
Have a bit of a chat on a weekly basis. So if you enjoy the Q&As, then you might enjoy the podcast as well. What else? We got like our Patreon and float plane stuff.
Yeah, check that out if you're interested. What have we got? We got an exclusive Discord server.
That's right.
Monthly live stream, which we're about to go do, but we do it every month. Behind the scenes content and Q&A stuff. So check that out if you're interested.
Yep.
But if not, perfectly fine. And Tim and I would like to thank you for watching this video.
Yes. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.